I'd like to second what Jess said. Thank you for the feedback about the audio. Thank you also to Elissa for your patience. You've given up your hour today to do this, and also we've interrupted you numerous times, and we know that you're doing your utmost to communicate clearly with us. So this is great. I think we're on a winner. We'll hand back over to Elissa. Thanks so much, and thanks everyone.
So hopefully you can hear me okay now, and unfortunately we've, I guess, missed study one, but the main findings from study one, I'll go over it again just so that it's hopefully really clear for everyone. 43% of people living with MCI are most likely to fall each year. So that is markedly different to people who are older, living in the community and don't have any cognitive impairment. But it is still less than people who are living with dementia in general. The main falls risk factors, we're looking at slow gait speed, dual task gait performance, and non-amnestic MCI are the main risk factors at this point in time. So please note that there's not actually that much research that's out there looking at people with MCI in the community. And we really are looking at trying to build that up over the coming years. And the falls prevention trials that have so far been published really haven't been concentrating on and specifically looking at falls for people with MCI. Those who have, they're very much pilot studies and small sample sizes. Okay, so study two, we're actually having a look to, one, see if people with MCI living in the community were able to wear an active PAL accelerometer for a 7-day period, because we weren't too sure whether that was possible or not. And also see whether, when they've self-reported that they're not meeting the physical activity guidelines, was that actually correct, or were they more physically active than they realised? So that study is also available. If for some reason you can't access it, please feel free to contact me and I will help you out with that. So this was a cross-sectional study, which just simply means that it's collecting data at one period of time. So everyone who was involved in the Balance on the Brain study, at their baseline data collection, we have included within this study. So everyone in the intervention group and also in the control group, we collected that data before they were actually randomized into a particular group. So we've got all of the data from them. We were recruiting for this particular study between January 2021 and September 2022, which is pretty much in the heart of COVID. And people needed to be living in the community, not in residential aged care, have a diagnosis of MCI that was consistent with the Peterson criteria, no significant mobility issues, and not meeting the physical activity guidelines, which was self-reported. And we did ask them to wear an active PAL accelerometer for 7 full days, as you can see by the picture there. We would put it in a little casing of the glove to protect it from any water that would get in, and then we'd actually administer it by tegaderm film. And each participant was given another 2 or 3 tegaderms and the Fixamal in case it happened to come off. And for a few clients, few participants, it did actually come off, but they were able to reattach it. The only thing that we did ask people not to do was go swimming. So swimming or sitting in a spa or a bath for a long period of time is not very good for an accelerometer, but having showers and doing everything else is not a problem whatsoever. So we had 91 participants that were included in this study, and 79 of those 91 actually provided full data for us. So they wore it consistently for the full 7 days of data. So it actually ended up being that they wore it for 9 days, because the day that they had it administered was only a partial day, so we didn't count that day. They then wore it for 7 full days of 24 hours a day. And then on the 9th day, it was collected by our research officers and taken off. So we only had part details for that day as well. Very similar to the studies that were involved in the systematic review, our median age was 76. So theirs was 75, our 76. And the number of females was very, very similar again. So we pretty much had a usual cohort going by the other 47 studies of people who are living with mild cognitive impairment in the community. Total step time across the day, and we actually took out all of the sleep hours. So they were actually removed from the data before we looked at any data analysis. They actually slept for 1.4 hours a day. So not an awful lot of activity was going on. And when you look at their moderate intensity activity, the median was 9 minutes. So these people are not active at all, pretty much. Then when you go down and you actually have a look at their total steps, they were just over 6,000. But the really interesting part was 3,300 steps per day on average were for a duration less than a minute. So we're talking about the person is sitting down in a chair, maybe watching TV or reading the paper or something like that. They got to get up and they go and have a cup of tea, back down to the chair. Then they go to the toilet, back down to the chair. So it's always less than a minute for that 3,300 steps, which is more than half of their daily steps for the day were in less than 1 minute blocks. So these people self-reported that they weren't meeting the physical activity guidelines very accurately. So we were able to find that out, but we also found out just how highly sedentary this cohort of people were. And they really did have minimal engagement in moderate intensity activity. There was one caveat though. I did have a participant who actually used one of the recumbent bikes, which is a bike where you're kind of lying down and your legs are making minimal movement on your thighs. And they actually rode around about 10 kilometres on one of the days, and it wasn't actually picked up by the accelerometer, which is really interesting because it picks up a normal bike. It certainly picks up movement like sit to stand, any type of walking, that's not a problem. But just so that you're aware, if you do use these and you've got people using those lie down bikes, it is likely to not actually pick it up. And he actually showed his Apple data and where exactly he'd gone on that ride on that particular day. So with regards to study 3, this is my Balance on the Brain trial. It's a randomized control trial looking at preventing falls and also improving balance for people living with mild cognitive impairment in the community. And it was placed onto the Australian New Zealand Clinical Trials Network. We called it for short Balance on the Brain, and it's quite well known now for that. We put all of our data entry through the REDCap database. So basically we had initial recruitment and screening, which was done by the telephone, and that took around about 30 to 45 minutes. If people got through that initial phone screen, then my research officers went out to their home and they administered the CDR and the SMMSE to see if they met the criteria for being part of the study, which is the Peterson's criteria for mild cognitive impairment. They also had to report that they had a memory complaint as well. Definitely had to be living in the community, not any type of independent housing which had assistance, not meeting the physical activity guidelines, and not participating in any balance training either. Some of the exclusion criteria also included having terminal illness, sensory impairment that could affect their mobility, and also alcohol consumption too. So if they're drinking over 28 glasses a week, that seems very excessive to me because I'm actually a non-drinker. But we did have a number of people who actually were drinking more alcohol than that, so they were actually excluded from the study. So although it sounds a little unusual to have in there, it is definitely necessary. Once people had signed the consent form and met the recruitment criteria, they then completed the baseline assessment, which was done in their home. And then after the baseline assessment, they had the accelerometer administered to their right thigh. We then actually randomized them into either the intervention group or the control group. And the intervention group received 2 balance training programs, one called Clock Yourself and the other one Balance Yourself. And they were both developed by a physiotherapist in Queensland, Meg Larry. And the control group just received the health education leaflet, and both groups did receive that. For the next 6 months, the intervention group had a number of physio appointments face-to-face in the home. So our physios went out there 6 times, and they also dotted in some follow-up phone calls across that 6-month period as well, and there were 4 phone calls on that. Then they completed the exact same assessment that was part of the baseline assessment, and that was at 6 months. But during that first 6 months, we also had monthly phone calls. We asked people if they'd fallen. If they had, then we asked a multitude of questions around those falls, in particular about injury, where it happened, did they receive emergency services or any medical services. But we also asked them about their health status each month across the year. And that was a really interesting process. I hadn't actually ever done that with any of my other randomized controlled trials before. And the different health issues that people living with MCI had across that 12-month period were quite amazing. I had a couple of people go from being diagnosed with MCI to actually being diagnosed with Parkinson's across that 12-month period. COVID was in there a lot, but there are a number of other things as well that were part of it too. We also asked them about their physical activity each month, what type of physical activity they were doing, how often they were doing it per week and per session. And so we've got that information also in that data for the intervention group and also the control group. 6 months, we did the baseline, redid the baseline assessment plus the accelerometer. Kept the all of the monthly calls going for the next 6 months, no intervention. We're in a maintenance phase for the intervention group. And then we've just completed the last of the 12-month assessments. And once again, they also had an accelerometer administered for the week after that as well. So the reason why I wanted to talk to you today about recruitment was, with a lot of different research projects, we're forever saying we didn't meet the sample size study for the sample size for the actual study, but no one goes into a lot of information about all the different types of recruitment that we actually tried for that study. And I would like to be able to assist people who want to work with people with MCI in the future, and show them the different types of recruitment that we tried over the 3 years of recruiting, and perhaps and potentially it might actually help them with their recruitment. So we had a number of memory clinics that were actually connected to the major tertiary hospitals here in Perth, but as well as the major tertiary hospitals, there were a couple that were connected to some smaller hospitals that were in really low socioeconomic areas for WA. So it was great not just to have people from high socioeconomic areas involved in this research. We had a real mixture. We also had some hospitals involved where OTs and physios on the wards would actually help us with recruitment too. We sent flyers out and we went to GP clinics and asked them if we could hang the flyers up on their notice boards. I got in touch with the regional assessment services and the ACATs over in Canberra and asked permission to speak to them over here, which I did speak to them and ask them to assist, because we know that a lot of people receiving home care services do have memory issues. Social media, they were actually through Facebook advertisements. So rather than just posting about the study, I also put out Facebook advertisements every week for pretty much every week for the 3 years. And you can actually, within an advertisement, say, I want to focus on people aged 50 years and above in the Perth metropolitan area, and also Rockingham and Mandurah, which is just south of Perth. And they would then send out these advertisements across those different areas to many, many people who are on Facebook. And there's a tendency for older people to use Facebook more so than Twitter or Instagram. So that's why I use the Facebook social media. As you can see there, I had a number of articles also in newspapers, both free newspapers, but also the West Australian is our major newspaper here in WA. And with that clip that says 51 ex-athletes now, in the bottom left-hand corner, I actually did a paid advertisement asking for volunteers to see if anyone would contact us through that. And we had a number of people contact us. And with regards to the recruitment flyers, I also gave them to the geriatricians as part of the memory clinics and gave them a really quick and easy summary of the inclusion and exclusion criteria as well. Curtin FM radio have a radio station that runs 24/7, and we actually ran very short 20-second adverts for 3-month periods at a time across the 3 years. And that was reasonably successful. I developed a website, which I completely created from scratch. People could go and see all of the information. They could get the participant information and consent forms off there. And it also gave an idea of where we were at with regards to recruitment as well. And I put some testimonials on there from people who had enjoyed being part of the research project as well. Step Up for Dementia Research, I contacted them and they were fantastic, allowed us to do the training, and then we contacted some people who had registered for that. Newsletters through Injury Matters, which is a great not-for-profit organisation here in WA. There are also newsletters within retirement villages, Coda WA, you name it. When it came to trying to access people who may have had a diagnosis of MCI, I tried almost everything. I also presented to the AUPOA gerontological group here in WA as well. So this just gives you a bit of an idea of how we went with regards to the initial pre-screening, and it shows some of the exclusions and why they were excluded at that part. As you can see there, social media and the memory clinics certainly provided the most for us across these 6 different areas, and radio was very good as well. Once they had gone through that initial screening, then we did the full REDCap screening, and that was going into the home as well and seeing if their CDR and SMMSE was actually within the limits that we needed as well. So as you can see there, the memory clinics had 54 people who were recruited into the study. The one thing I forgot to mention was every fortnight I'd actually send out a update on where we're at with regards to the memory clinics and each different clinic, so that they could see how many people they had sent through to us and how many people had actually gone on to be recruited into the actual study. And a couple of those memory clinics were fantastic. They were really competitive together and they did a brilliant job, and it was a really nice way for them to keep up with how each of the different memory clinics were going. When we look at some of the lesser types of recruitment, the website did have a number of people actually go onto the website and look, but unfortunately they didn't come up to the recruitment criteria. And there were a number of people who we also were unsure where they actually found out about us as well. So I'll just go back here. The 3 highest or most successful types of recruitment are actually memory clinics at 54, social media at 34, and radio at 21 for us. And we did successfully recruit 128 people, which is certainly not the target that we were looking at, but I'll go into that in the next slide. So what we found that was when we actually started the recruitment, pretty much it was right in the height of COVID. If you have been living in WA, we certainly didn't get hit with COVID like the rest of Australia did. But the one thing that really did happen in WA was the media and the government were very firm on do not let people into your home during a good probably 12 to 18 month period. Make sure that you're not in big groups, try and avoid a lot of contact with people. And so we really found that older people were not that interested in having a research officer or a health professional, one of the physios, go into their home and be part of the project. So that definitely did stifle our recruitment. It was really interesting with our monthly phone calls across the 12 months for each person. As the time went on, preceding the real height of COVID, you would have all been aware of the fact that the media really spoke a lot about people getting scammed, and in particular getting scammed through phone calls. And we found it increasingly more difficult to even get a hold of our participants who had consented to being part of it. They knew who my research officer was. She would leave messages for them. And we found it increasingly more difficult to actually get a hold of people over the phone. looking back on it, I would probably have less inclusion criteria outside of a diagnosis of MCI, because the more exclusions you have, the more difficult it is to recruit people, and it probably wouldn't have mattered with regards to how physically active they were, because it appeared that most people were actually not particularly physically active within this area, and those who were too physically active and meeting the physical activity guidelines, we don't actually know if they met our criteria for MCI. So they're excluded through the physical activity exclusion rather than through MCI. So we're not 100% sure whether they would have been excluded anyway. And it wasn't a multi-site study. So in the future, having multiple sites would definitely be of benefit, not just here in Western Australia. So we aimed to get 396 people, but unfortunately only achieved 128, which was almost 4 people per month. So we used multiple recruitment methods. Looking back on it, could I have done more within WA in the height of COVID? I can't actually think of anything more that I could have done with regards to trying to recruit. Building the relationships with the geriatricians, keeping them in touch and in the loop constantly over that 3-year period was really important. And I'm hugely grateful to them for all of the assistance that they gave us. Facebook and radio were real surprises, in particular Facebook. And it was great to have people who we ordinarily wouldn't have had involved. So they were going along quite nicely in the community. Yes, they had MCI, but they were functioning quite nicely, whereas they were quite interested in being involved, and they saw that through Facebook. GPs just don't have the time. It's very difficult with their 15-minute appointments, and so I'm not 100% sure how we could work more closely with GPs, and if anyone has some solutions with that, I would be all ears and would love to hear about it. There have been 2 other studies that have actually produced papers that have looked specifically at their recruitment of people with MCI. So there was one study that was across 3 European countries, and interestingly, the majority of people who actually were recruited into that study were recruited from a community gymnasium. So they had the most people across those 3 countries who had MCI, and they had almost 10 people per month. Really large study in the USA who had a mass mail out. Almost 500,000 people that mail out went to. There were 14 sites across the whole of the USA, and they recruited almost 300 people over 48 months, which was just over 6 people a month. Really impressive. I'm not 100% sure how we would do a mass mail out to people who are living with MCI here in Australia. Certainly here in WA, the hospital systems and the different hospitals don't even talk to themselves, so or to each other. Some have different computer systems, so I'm not sure how we would get all of the data and the prevalence of people and who have actually had a diagnosis of MCI across the whole of Australia, and how we could actually do that. I think the UK could definitely do it with their biobank data and with all of the people who signed up to be involved in research and were happy to be contacted by research. But that's something that probably we in Australia need to be looking at. Step Up registry was very good, but unfortunately there are only 4 people in WA who had registered with having MCI. Both of these studies that have been published were both pre-COVID. So they certainly weren't recruiting right at the heart of COVID. I'd really like to thank my collaborators who come from across all different parts of Australia, and I also have Kirk Erickson, who's also from the USA as part of the study. The collaborators who are part of the memory clinics and in the hospital system were just fantastic across those 3 or 4 years. And to Jane Hopkins, who's just passed her PhD, she was a fabulous member, and she's an OT who's part of the Fiona Stanley Hospital system and a cognitive champion within the hospital system. So she was just an absolute dream of a PhD student. I'd also like to thank the NHMRC for funding me as part of my investigator grant. And if you are a health professional or you're an older person who is living independently in the community, I write a free monthly blog that is just using evidence-based research, but put in a really user-friendly, easy to read, usually takes about 5 minutes. So it means that you as a health professional don't have to troll through hours of different research and publications. If you're interested, you can subscribe for free. All you have to do is put in a first name. I don't care if it's not your first name, and an email address, and then that gets sent to you each month. And it's just a really easy way to keep up with the evidence-based research at the moment. And there's the references, and hopefully for at least the last half you could hear me. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you, Elissa. Absolutely, we could. It was a wonderful change to the audio, and the presentation throughout was very interesting, very useful, and really appreciate it. We'll open up for questions now. If anyone would like to turn on their camera and ask a question verbally, please do so. Otherwise, feel free to put something into the chat. Maybe I'll start while we get questions going, Elissa. If you had your time again, if you could go back and run it all again and COVID wasn't a factor, do you feel like there are any learnings that you've got from this in terms of recruitment and pragmatics?
Yeah, I think I would do, I think the accelerometer data has been fantastic, and it's great not to have self-report on physical activity. But I think if I'm concentrating fully on falls prevention, it would have meant one less session that a research officer had to go back into the home with, and that was for 3 times. I would probably cut that out and have looked at partnering with, say, yourselves in Melbourne, and tried to have gotten more recruitment in that way. So
Right.
I think in hindsight, that's what I probably would have done if we didn't have COVID, because COVID in Melbourne probably wouldn't have helped.
Exactly. You know, best laid plans.
Yeah.
Exactly. We've got a question here from Karen. Thank you for that, Karen. Did you explore any falls prevention measures used people with MCI?
Falls prevention measures. So with regards to, we collected the falls data each month, which it was dependent on whether they had had a fall or not. If they said yes, then we asked a number of other questions. We also used a fear of falling tool as well. So we did collect that data.
Right, thank you. We've got a question here around whether there's a register for people with dementia in Australia.
Yes, Step Up. The Step Up registry is for people living with dementia or MCI. It's dependent on the person with dementia actually going to Step Up or their carer. So rather than it being, say, if a geriatrician or something diagnoses someone with dementia, it doesn't automatically put them involved in Step Up, which would be a great thing, but it's only for people who are interested in research. We did have one person who was recruited from that Step Up.
Right. I can add to that also, you know, for the person asking the question, that there is the ADNET, the Australian Dementia Network, which is, you know, in the same sort of space. Wouldn't have been applicable to Elissa's study, just to point out there. That's not something that I'm suggesting that she missed, but it is a network that's trying to set up and link things more closely so that people have access to clinical trials and the like. But as you pointed out, Elissa, I think here in Australia, probably due to our size and the way in which, you know, our systems are put together, we're a little bit, unfortunately, behind some other parts of the world in getting access to and rolling into different trials. Now,
it would be great if our systems actually talk to each other.
Wouldn't it? That's it. That's always the aim. Now, Sarah asked here, I may have missed it, but did you try recruitment through home care package providers?
That was through the RAS assessors. We didn't actually go to specific organisations. So maybe we should have done that rather than going through the assessors.
Always difficult though.
Yes, it is.
Excellent. Right,
And at that time, I do have some links to home care organisations, and at that time they were having an absolute nightmare with COVID. Even their own staff being able to get in homes, and the PPE, and the last thing they would have had on their mind would have been helping me with balance on the brain, and quite rightly so.
Yeah, well said. Do we have any other questions? Elissa, I'd like to sort of second your advertising, for want of a better term, for your blog, which I actually read through LinkedIn, which is fantastic. But with that you've been putting out there, what are some of the key things that you would really like, you know, an audience like this to take away from the work as you're seeing it, and where we think the literature's at the moment?
Sure. So with regards to the blog, it's not just simply about falls prevention. It is about all different aspects that older people can think about and look at to help them to live independently. So for instance, earlier in the year, I spoke about the risks of getting dementia. They've actually been updated now. Instead of the 12 risks, they're now 14 risks. So things like hearing impairment, and vision loss, and low education and physical activity, and type 2 diabetes is certainly a risk factor. So the blog has been really interesting because of speaking about these things. I've had a number of people contact me and say, oh, I didn't realize about the hearing loss. I actually went and got my hearing tested. And I've had at least 5 people contact me and say that, and a couple of people, their hearing actually wasn't as good as they wanted. And so they're now wearing hearing aids, which are very small these days, and you pretty much can't see them. And they just contacted me and said, thank you so much for doing that. My blog last month was about having your different papers in place. So making sure you've got a will, having your power of attorney and your power of guardianship up to date. Certainly power of guardianship's really important in our space, because that's all about your health and what you would like to have happen as you, at any age really. I have a power of guardianship. So it's for anyone who wants to be organised and is thinking about the fact that we're not 15 and going to live forever. So having those things in place is really important.
And Sahira just asked about your blog here, and Jess, thanks so much for putting your putting the link up there. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Annie has got a question here. Give info to leisure and health course. Maybe Annie, I could get you to give a little bit more information there, unless Elissa, that sort of you know, resonates with you, what that might be about.
Yeah, is Annie wanting me to give some information, or is she giving some information?
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
If you have a chance, Annie, or you want to turn on your camera and let us know, we'd love to sort of address that. So was there a difference in falls risk between control and intervention group in study 3? That's a question from Ken.
Great question, Ken. And we finished the assessments in December. Services Australia will be giving me data from each participant for their MBS and PBS, which is just their medical, GP, x-rays, anything like that, and their pharmaceuticals. I'm in the midst of finishing off the paperwork with the WA Department of Health data linkage services, and they will be giving me all the hospital services data. And we will be analysing all of that data, as well as the huge amount of data that we collected during the 12 months for each person. And hopefully we'll have some results later this year.
Fantastic. Which specific tool did you use to assess falls risk in the community?
Yes,
from Sangeetha?
That's a very good question. And it's been a while ago now, so I will just look up my paper to make sure I don't tell you the wrong one, because I have a number of projects going at the moment, and I often do use these, so I don't want to give you the wrong one.
No, and I think that's fantastic. It really indicates, you know, how we need to use the right measure for the right study, and there's not necessarily one. go to all the time.
Exactly. Yep. We use the Falls Efficacy Scale International, so the FESI.
Right.
Yep. And we did have two primary outcomes. One was falls and the other one was balance. We did look at quality of life as well across the yearly study, and short physical performance battery we also used, and a 4-square step test, and timed up and go as well, and a 6-minute walk test. So as you can see, we did a lot of assessments.
Threw everything at them.
Yep.
Fantastic. Do we have any other questions? We're just coming towards the end of our time, but we do have time for another question if someone's got something burning that they'd like to ask Elissa. All right, I might start and bring us towards a close then. This is our last seminar in Aging for 2024. I want to take a moment to thank Jess Barry, who's our NARI education organiser that's been involved in these. Yeah, absolutely fantastic effort, and from the NARI team to bring us these free seminars in ageing each week, along with our academics who are giving us, you know, so much of their time and expertise, and it's very much appreciated. We're going to be back in February 2025 on the NARI website, etc. We will have a whole heap of information on who our speakers will be. I'm just reading something that's popped up. Did you take into account any home mods or equipment installed during the year? Great question. You snuck it in before I finished, so that's fantastic. Yeah.
Well, it's a good question. Thinking back on the different data that my research officer collected during those phone calls, I don't recall, but that's not to say that it didn't happen, because she was doing something like 300 calls a month. So so yes, it very well, there could be some stuff in there, because she certainly added some stuff, but off the top of my head, I don't know of any.
Not a problem. I'd be grateful if everyone would join with me, maybe if you've got your clap reactions handy, or if not, just a little to the screen, thanking Elissa for her presentation today. It was really appreciated. Thank you everyone for attending. And as I said, you'll be notified of the list of speakers as soon as we've got that done. I'm wishing everyone a really happy and safe festive season. We'll see you again next year for more seminars in ageing. Thanks everyone.